Okay, it looks like some people are still coming in, so we'll just go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today for our discussion on how to ensure a successful CRM implementation. We felt that this was an important topic to cover because the unfortunate reality is that 30 to 70% of CRM implementations do fail. Now, there are various reasons for why that is, and we're going to explain that a little bit more in the webinar. But the main thing that we want you to take away from today's call is an understanding of how you can avoid being lumped into that statistic for your CRM project. There are best practices and strategies that CRM consultancies like Tech Advisors use to guide clients to successful outcomes, and we want you to start thinking about these strategies as you consider your next project. So let's get started with a little information about us so you know where we're coming from in this advice. We are a CRM and digital transformation consultancy out of Chicago. And what sets us apart from many other consultancies like us is that we're also enterprise data specialists. So we're a sister company to our iPaaS. And for those of you who don't know that term, it just means integration platform as a service. And that solution is called Starfish ETL. So we use that to migrate and integrate your data as well. And that makes us kind of the complete package for being able to not only get you successfully up and running on CRM, but also bridge these additional connections to streamline your operational efficiency through your data. We've been doing this a long time, more than 33 years. And we've worked with companies of all industries, more than 5,500, companies across the United States. This gives us very strong institutional knowledge on the nuances of each industry and what they require for their specific digital use cases. We also use US-based resources, and these customer service excellence awards that you're seeing here, there's 3 of them. That's just the ones that we've won within the past few years. Overall, actually, we've been recognized with more than 50 awards for our customer experience, our expertise, and our delivery of services. So enough of tooting our own horn, but I just wanted to let you know what we're all about so you can understand where we're coming from with our presentation. These are just a handful of our customers over the years, so you can see it's a very diverse group, from manufacturing to financial services to hospitality. And what our goal is here is always to help our customers scale. And so if you want to learn more about what it's like working with us, you can check out more of our reviews on our G2 page. That's where we're getting this 88% 5-star customer reviews from. That's from our G2 page, from customers coming in and describing what it's like to work with us. So you can check us out there. All right, so with that groundwork out of the way, let's get down to business. My name is Deneen. I am the Marketing and Content Director here at Technology Advisors. Sam, our founder and CEO, has the deepest knowledge on this topic, so he's going to guide you through this information today. I'm going to hand things off to him. If you have any questions as we go, please feel free to ask. I'm also recording this, so we'll send it to you afterwards if you'd like to go back and reference anything later. Okay, Sam, take it away.
Yeah, so we're going to go through the agenda really quick. Our goal, and I'll go from backwards to forwards, our goal is for you to have a successful first phase implementation, which we call a minimally viable product, or an MVP. And to be able to do that, you need to understand why projects fail in the first place and how to reduce risk. Because at the end of the day, every project fails because of risk, too much risk. And so we're going to talk through how do you reduce the amount of risk on a project, and then what's the best way to continually improve and update your system. So why do projects fail? Let's go through the 3 or 4 different reasons here. First is what I call overreach. What people want to do is they try to do everything with the kitchen sink all into one implementation. And when that happens, the project becomes so complex that it can't be done. There's actually a lot of statistics around project size versus time. And projects, if you track failure of projects and the time it takes for them to start to end, the probability of failure starts to increase exponentially after 6 months or around that point. So the goal here is to not do anything really complex and big if you can avoid it. The second thing is we see a lot of companies who just don't do proper training. They invest in a great product, but without training, the users don't use it. And then a lot of times we'll see a lack of management support and input. So a lot of times we see that we will be building something, but we won't have the manager's input on it. And then when it finally comes to roll out, then there's a considerable number of changes. Even though we've documented many times that we need more input, they don't really look at it because they're usually overworked. And then it's very challenging to produce something unless you have really accurate requirements. And so it's really a measure twice, cut once type of approach that you need to take. And a lot of times customers just don't have the time to spend building out the accurate and sufficient requirements. So what causes overreach and complexity? Well, how does it happen? First thing is politics. Uh, Sometimes they want to get everyone to support the system, so they promise every division they're going to be part of the initial rollout in some fashion. And that just really is a massive mistake. It's better to start with a small group and then roll out slowly than to try to give a partial system to everybody or even a full system to everybody. The next is inexperience. Typically, they don't understand the complexities of how to implement. Either it's a technical solution or it's a business solution. They haven't done their homework. A lot of times we'll get into an organization and we'll ask simple questions like, how do you know you have a market qualified lead? And they don't have a process for that. Or how do I know, do I have a sales qualified lead? Again, they don't have a process for that. So there's a lot of process oriented groundwork that really has to get done in the design and requirement space that a lot of companies don't do or don't have an answer for, and therefore it increases the complexity of the product. And then the third one is just bad project management. You have to have the ability to say no to people. And it's not that you're saying no, you're just saying not now. Okay. Which is how I talked to my granddog, when it's going crazy. Anyway, so poor project management, a good project manager is saying, yeah, we'll take care of that later, but that's not going to be in the initial release. So they have to be able to say that. The next thing is training issues. And a lot of times we find that customers cut training out of the budget because the budget runs over, which is probably the biggest mistake they can make. The second thing is they don't understand that people learn differently. So we had a situation where they wanted to cut back on training because the vendor was going to give them free video-based training, but that really is not necessarily the best way of being trained for some people. But some people have to sit in a live class. Some people have to read. Some people have to do it through visual training. Every person is a different type of learning skill, and we have to address that. The other thing is that they tend to have like longer classes than they should. So people start, you absorb about 2 hours worth of training, and then that starts to diminish after that 2 hour period. And people will try to do like, well, we're going to put you in a 6 hour class. Well, yeah, they'll probably retain 2 hours of the 6 hours. So it's actually better to do a series of short, training classes that are reinforced after the class is over. And then the last one, of course, is insufficient time to reinforce the training. We see this a lot where people will train their users maybe 6 to 10 days before they actually have access to the system. Frankly, if you sat through a training class and then 5 days later someone hands you the software, you're not going to remember what to do. So you need to either reinforce that training, or you need to you need to actually have them go through the training and the next day start using the system, or even that day start using the system. And then from a support perspective, a lot of times support comes in a lot of different forms. My favorite one is not enough budget. Someone will come in and say, well, we need this implemented, but I have X dollars. Well, X dollars may not do that, might not meet the goal. And so therefore they're cutting features and making it less useful. There's not enough technical resources. A lot of times you need technical people to come in. Even when we work with no code, there's still some parts of it that are technical and require part of your IT team to do the work. And then no participation from the business. This is another frequent one where the business is really busy. And so either they don't give in input or strong input, or they take so much time generating input that they hit past that 6-month barrier, and those projects then become at risk. And the last one is little or missing requirements. A lot of times, and this is one of my favorite cartoons of all time, and it came out almost 30 years ago, but it's still one of my favorites, where guys saying, I'll go up and find out what they want, and you guys start coding. And a lot of times that's what happens, where we don't have missing or information about what we're supposed to be building. But there's a great agile process for collecting that, but that takes time. And again, it's actually almost, you've got to start thinking in the terms of, if you want to have a successful implementation, you're probably going to spend as much time gathering requirements and creating and documenting processes as you are building the solution. So you have got to start thinking in those terms. The next one is the requirements are too general. People will say, well, we want like opportunity management, but that's great. I think I have an idea what opportunity management is. I hope it's the same idea you have about opportunity management. And then the last one is just lack of planning. We see it a lot of times. No one really wants to think through the whole problem. They want to look at a subset of the problem first. And therefore, what ends up happening is that the next phase technically will impact potentially the first phase. So it's always best to do all the planning for the entire project up front, and then roll it out in little small chunks. So the reason why all these things are all important is because what they do is they create risk. If I have a system that's too complex, I'm adding risk to the project. If I don't have support from the right people, or I'm not getting the amount of training, or we're not doing proper project planning, all those things are just adding risk to the project. And if you can measure risk, you can actually figure out how big of a project you need to implement, because risk should be driving that. And so risk is actually, there's a formula for risk. This is actually the formula for risk. So it's you multiply for each use case the chance of success, and that gives you an overall a success rate. So if I have 100 use cases and they're highly successful, every one of them, 99.9, but I got 100 of them, I got a 90% chance that I'll be successful. On the other hand, if I have 1,000 use cases at 99.9%, it gets 36%, which means you're probably going to fail. And so one of the things you have to start doing when you start building out your systems is start really honestly saying, what is the risk? If it's a built-in feature, and it works, I go with 99.99. It's there. It's a built-in feature. If it's a custom feature that I have to bring in, maybe that's 99%. If it's a third-party product, well, maybe that's a 90%, because I got to plug that in somehow. If it requires multiple people in the organization to participate in designing something, maybe that's a 90%, and so on. You got to start thinking about that. I even look at integrations and say they're probably about 8 out of 10 successful, and so we can actually measure the chances of success once you've gone through the design phase and do the use cases. And in risk, less is more. If I can do less use cases, I have a greater chance of succeeding. And that's why we always talk about the minimally viable solution or minimally viable product. So how do you reduce risk? Well, the first thing is, in fact, to go and create what I call the minimally viable product. You really need to think of your phase one. And so typically what we do is we would gather all the requirements for the entire project. And once we have all the requirements down and all the use cases built, then we start figuring out what should be in the initial release. And we can measure risk of each of the use cases and tweak that number to the point where we have comfortable risk. You're never going to get it to 100%. That's never going to happen. 100% success rate is relatively impossible, because even if I'm using 100 every out-of-box feature, I'm still having a minimal amount of risk in each of those features. So the next one is, if there is an out-of-box feature, use it. We have had cases in the past where we've had customers require or ask us to build something that was very complex to build, and instead of using the out-of-box features for the first phase. And though that project, in fact, got shelved because they couldn't make it perfect, unfortunately, because of the level of complexity. On the other hand, they had a completely working system. It was one person with one screen who was unhappy and caused them to lose a lot of money. The also can you one more so we can read yeah. And so understand that when you deploy your minimally viable solution, it's not like etched in stone. That's a real important thing to understand. So if you want a custom feature, but you can use an out-of-box feature, the proper way to do this is use as much out-of-box features as you can, and then just put it on your list for a future phase to update that and make it only a short-term solution. And that's really the best way of being successful. And then the other thing you need to start thinking about is mixing what I would call high success and low success features in the same release. So if I have nothing but high success, low success features, like let's say I've got 10 integrations I have to build, okay, and I got an 80% chance. Can you hit the slide one more time? Yes. So if you have an 80% chance of an integration being successful and you got 10 of them, it means you've got 11% chance of success. So if you're going to do an integration, which everyone wants to do an integration, it's the proper thing to do. Make sure maybe one integration is included in the MVP, and then on the second release, add maybe one or two other integrations. There's no rule that says you have to roll things out in like 1 year or 6 months and get everything right. The way to do this is to do do a couple big releases and then go into a process of continuing to make updates. So we're going to talk about a phased approach, and this is my suggestions for the first phase. So this would be your MVP, and this is mostly out of the box components with a simple integration. And here's why. Here's why. You still have to train people. They still have to start using the system. That's going to add risk as well because they're not familiar with the new system. There'll be some new processes as well. Because typically that's what happens when you use mostly out of the box system. And so if you can do that, and that's your phase one, then you can quickly in 3 months come out with your phase two, which has maybe expanded integration. So maybe you have a one-way integration in phase one that becomes a bidirectional integration in phase two. Maybe you deploy for one team, and then in the second phase, you deploy for three more teams because now you have experience in the company in that one team. Deploying it for the other teams is going to be a lot easier. And then phase three is where I go and add integrations and add features. So every phase after that would be a new integration, a new feature. But it would be what I would call a slow roll. And my rule of thumb is, again, you're going to do all the design up front. So the construction component should take no more than 3 months. So you may spend 4 to 6 months planning. Actually, it's more like, if you're really fast, it's about 2.5 months of planning. If you're not, it's 6 months of planning up front. But then after that, every phase, every construction and deployment should be about a 3-month cycle. So here's our phase one MVP. And here's how I think about it. So I actually built this yesterday because I had to really think about how I do stuff. And I just realized I don't have a start, which would have been over here. But what I looked is, first of all, am I going to roll out this thing for multiple teams? Because if the answer is no, then I would roll out just mostly out of box features and be done with my first phase. If I had a rollout for multiple teams, then I would actually calculate the ROI for each team, pick the one that's the highest and roll them out, and then continue this process in little mini releases until they're done. So I would have a phase 1.1 and a phase 1.2, but each is one rolling out a different team. This all changes. Oh, go back. This all changes if I have an existing CRM, because you can't take away features from people. So again, if you have an existing CRM, now I've got to go through a slightly different process. I have to go out and get a inventory of what features are being used. And I have to ask, can I run the system in parallel? If I can, then you would roll out one group to the new system, take them off the old system, and do that process over and over until I'm done. If I can't run them in parallel, then I have to try to reduce the number of custom features, if possible, with out-of-box features so that I can reduce the risk of the overall project. And again, my philosophy on rolling stuff out is I always try to roll out the highest ROI groups and the highest ROI feature set first, and then work down from there. Because at the end of the day, management wants to see return on their investment, and it's all about, in my mind, ROI. But we can go to the next slide. So what are the barriers to creating an MVP? And we talked about this early on. Number one is politics. We were rolling out a system, this was a long time ago, for a large office supply company. And they had roughly 5,000 sales teams. And we were building it for, the initial rollout was for a very small call center team of maybe 150 or 200 people, and that was going to be our MVP. And somewhere along the line, the head of sales said, well, why aren't we rolling it out for the direct sales team, which was like 3,000 people? And it turns out that they changed the course of the implementation and added almost double to the price of the and time to the project, because we had to go back and gather new requirements and come up with a plan or strategy around training thousands of people at the same time. The second thing is, people in the organization just don't like to change. And so you're going to run into what I would call people barriers. And there's a great way to solve this problem, which is it's called transition management team. And the idea is that you find all the people who love the old system, particularly, and you pull them in a group. And throughout the entire design process, you keep getting them engaged and asking them, well, what do you think about this? How would you make this better? And incorporate their ideas. It's very difficult to be against something that you're part of the team that designed it, and therefore you're going to find that they're going to become your allies in the implementation. Um, and the second one is mission critical features. Sometimes the MVP, you have a feature that is so complex. I can think of a company that they had an equivalent system already. They wanted the old system to work exactly like the new system. And they extended the implementation time by about 2.5 years because they had to build out a lot of technology to make the systems compatible because they felt this was a mission critical feature. The reality, it turns out it wasn't. They could have simply started using it in about 6 months after they had bought the software, but they proceeded to spend a couple $100,000 on software they weren't using while they were building it out, which was just crazy and disappointing. But again, it was the fact that the business owners wanted this one feature in it, which could have been skipped, frankly. Uh, so this is the way I recommend. After you've done your phase 1 through phase 3 of implementations, we worked with a client years ago, and they had, I think, the most successful implementation I've ever seen. They continued to use the product for something like 10 to 12 years. And what they did was they developed a process with our team. Let's go to the next slide. Where they did this 3-month program they spent 1 month creating a plan so there would be a continuous list of other things, feature requests, and they would go through and they would evaluate the cost of each feature and how it would save them money, what was the ROI. And there would be an initial plan that was basically 3 to 4 weeks long, where they go through and figure out what features could fit in a 1 month build. And then they spent 1 month building it. And then the final month was testing and training and deployment. And then they started all over again. And they had one team of about 3 people, full-time. This was a publicly traded company. And there would be features that people would want, but didn't have a high ROI, and they would be at the bottom of the list. But as the business got bigger and changed, this process right here really helped them keep their system current and addressed all the key things that the company needed to address. I think that's my, oh, no, never mind. 2 more slides. So how do you do this technique for figuring out what's in each phase? And so I'm going to walk you through how we do it. There's a diagram called a Moscow diagram, which was actually used for development of software in the 70s that we've reincorporated. And M stands for must have, S has should have, C is could have, and won't need. And what we do is we literally take every feature and use case and map them into those categories. And there's some guidelines. You can't have everything a must have. That's the first rule. I've seen people say, well, we must have that. Oh, we must have that too. But if you start to talk to people about it, a lot of things that are musts are shoulds. And so this will help you figure out what's has to happen in phase one. It'll end up being almost every must and maybe a couple shoulds. Um, but it also lets you figure out what's in phase two and phase three. And with every piece of software, what you want to do is you want to turn off the features that you're not using. So the won't need will literally be the features you hide inside the product so that people don't play with them because they're not important to the way you want to run the company. The next thing we do is this thing called a user story map. So a user story, we take every one of those musts have, and that becomes this little yellow thing over here at the top. And what happens is we say that item breaks down into a series of subtasks. And those subtasks can be done sometimes in phase one, sometimes they can be done in a later phase. So, for example, if you wanted to do, say, something like an activity tracking, you might have, activities and activity reporting in phase one, but then potentially add the outcome of those activities in a phase two, for example. And so you can take a particular feature uh, and break that down into a whole bunch of user stories, and those user stories can be prioritized. So you'll have some user stories that are 100% have require a prerequisite user story. So all those that have to be in the first phase and their prerequisites become phase one or the MVP. Everything else can be deferred and looked at a different time. And so we use this style of mapping to figure out what's in phase one, what's in a later phase, not necessarily phase two. And then the last thing we like to do, if we have the time, is to do what we call a customer experience map. So one of the things when you start building out your solution, and you can, by the way, do this as a user experience as well. Don't think of this just as customer, you can use it as user. Um, when you have a process, you want to ask yourself, does the user or does the customer feel good, neutral, or bad about each step of the process? And so this one here is an example from I grabbed that was filling out a loan app, but you can do you should really be starting to think about, this is a neutral step, this is a positive step, this is a negative step, and you should be doing that for your customers as you're building these systems. You certainly don't want everything to be red, right? That's not going to help you make money, right? You want to make everything as positive as possible, but the same thing goes for the people using the system. If they have to go through a series of steps, and on those steps, say I have to duplicate data or put it in a different system or stop what I'm doing here and jump to a different system there, those are going to be negative experiences for them and will actually cause risk to the project because it requires them to do things that that they don't want to do. And so one of the things you can do is sit down and as you go through the design phase and talk about how you're doing things, you can ask them, what do you think of this? Is this good? Is this bad? Is this neutral? It's just a simple process. And then you can come back with, well, what's the outcomes and what's the consequences of this? So this is sort of how we go around figuring out what's in our MVP. Um, so we've been doing this for a long time. We can certainly help you. Deneen, take it.
You basically started me off right there. That's what I wanted to end this with. And I do see we have some questions. I will get to those. But so Sam has now taught us what we need to learn and what we need to pay attention to plan our CRM implementation. A lot of people feel like that's overwhelming and they don't have the resources internally to do that. And that's where we can help. So wherever you are in your CRM journey, if you have an old CRM that you want to move off of, you're not sure what you need, or maybe you do know what you need and you just need help to customize a solution to your processes, or you just want to look at your entire tech stack and just optimize everything. we can step in and help you with that. And our contact information is here if you want to reach out direct to Sam, or you can reach out to our sales team via our general sales email. And we're happy to get on a call with you and kind of discuss the specifics of what your project is and what you need that we can help you with. So we're going to wrap up now, and I do see a few questions. So it looks like the first question here is, if phases are about 3 months, does that mean our priority users will be able to start using the minimal viable product within the first 3 months of implementing?
Yeah, and no, it's construction's about 3 months. So you still have to do the design work. So it would be like building a house where you start with, some architectural drawings to begin with, and then you go to blueprints, and then from the blueprint you start the building. So in this case, the design phase usually takes a couple months if you're a fairly large, depends on how big the company is and how many groups you're rolling out, but usually it's somewhere between, on the short end, about 6 to 8 weeks for design. On the large end, I've seen it go 6 months. And so then at that point, you'd have a 3-month roughly build rollout. But again, if you're very small and you're running out of box, it's not going to be a 3-month build. It might only be a 1.5-month build. So, it all depends on how much you're rolling out and how complex, but on the average, it's about 5 months to get the initial system, the first phase out the door on the average.
Okay, and our other question here is, our existing CRM has low user adoption, and we're looking at moving to a new one. Any advice for improving adoption this time around?
Transition management team and change management process are the two things I do. If you're having low adoption, it's either because people don't like the system for some reason, or they haven't been trained properly. So you need to sort of drill into that. Plus switching systems, particularly if the system is now you said low adoption, but when you're switching systems, the people who actually use it go through something of a grieving process. So you've got to take them, you got to explain to them what you're doing and why you're doing it. You got to get their input. You gotta say goodbye to the old solution, and then you have to celebrate the new one. And you got to bring all the people on the team and make it a really important thing that they're using the new system. So that's the sort of the critical way of doing it.
Okay, I don't see any other questions right now. If anyone has anything else they'd like to add, now's the time. Or if you think of something later and you want to reach out to us, please feel free, and we're happy to answer your questions.